With the release of Ashen Iron and being able to get tier 5s from Solo Ops, Fireteam Ops, and Pinnacle Ops, a lot of weapons became available to us in their tier 5 versions, and one of them I was hunting for specifically because I saw it had the potential to be a very high value weapon, especially for the long end game of PvP and PvE, plus with a unique interaction with its origin trait that has the potential to make you very, very tanky in endgame content. How's it going, YouTube? Your boy Chill here. Today I'm going to be talking about the SMG which you can acquire from Solo Ops and Fireteam Ops called Nilus 2. Now, when I saw this SMG in the database, I thought it was fairly average, nothing too standoffish with it, like anything that made it stand out over other SMGs. However, I did see an interaction with one of its perks, a combination with its origin trait that has the potential to be potent in PvP and actually has a mainstay for PvE for endgame content, especially in the higher end difficulties of that. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the god rolls that I would go for PvE and PvP, some interactions to be noteful of, and hopefully help you all decide which god roll you should go for. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Like, comment, subscribe if you do. Let's get into it. So firstly, going over the perks. In the left column, we have Slice, Offhand Strike, Dynamic Strike Reduction, Encore, Proximity Power, and Transcendent Moment. In the fourth column, we have Hatchling, Dragonfly, Swashbuckler, Binary Orbit, Surrounded, and Harmony. Firstly, going over PvE first. There's only really two perks here that I value in PvE that are more main staples to take advantage of in that game mode. Firstly, we have Proximity Power. Now, Proximity Power states when your nearby target's final blows grant an improved amount of bonus melee stat when enhanced. With the enhanced version, you get plus 18 melee stat per stack of Proximity Power. So if you're rocking a melee build but you can't get to 200 melee stat, having that in combination with Proximity Power can help you top it off as long as you're getting kills with that perk active. Now, in higher end content, you're going to notice some struggles with that because a lot of enemies in endgame content are very tanky. So keep that in mind. I would definitely recommend Proximity Power for more lower end content with your melee builds and maybe if you know the base raids. But if you're going to harder content like the new Epic raid or hard mode versions of raids where enemies are generally more tanky and can take a lot more hits, I would not recommend it in that situation, but only in the case that you're using a melee build. If you're not using a melee build, stay away from this perk. And the other perk is Slice. Now, there's a specific thing I want to go over with Slice. The way Slice works is that after casting your class ability, it allows you to sever targets on hit, up to an improved duration when enhanced. Now, the benefit to this is that it reduces damage output for enemies in both PvE and PvP. With that being said, it also has access to the origin trait, Vanguard's Determination. With this origin trait, after casting your class ability, every elimination after the fact will give you stacking damage resistance, and I believe this works in PvE and PvP. Currently, right now, I was not able to test the numbers because I did not have anyone active, but in theory, it should still work in PvP and give you damage resistance in there to help you survive. Now think about that for a second. Being able to reduce the damage output of enemies in PvE and PvP, and then after that, after you get an elimination, you have increased damage resistance for your next engagements. That combo right there is probably the best value of this SMG, bar none. While I was getting footage for the PvP section of this video, I was testing out Slice and the origin trait, and I have to tell you, it's very nice. But we'll get into that more in the PvP section, but I wanted to let you know now, Slice in combination with this origin trait is going to be your best friend for this SMG, bar none. Just keep that in mind. Nextly, let's go to the fourth column. In the fourth column, we have Hatchling, which recently got buffed to allow 2 potential threadlings to spawn after getting an elimination instead of 1 when enhanced. And threadlings themselves got buffed in damage output so they do 20% more damage in PvE content. I was trying this out in PvE, and I gotta say, the threadlings were actually keeping up in ultimate difficulty. It was very, very noticeable. Threadlings were actually pretty good. And then we also have Dragonfly, which also got buffed as well. So now instead of the enhanced version giving +5 reload, it increased the damage output of Dragonfly by 10%. Now this one's a very good one for ad clearing, but I would definitely save this more for lower end content. In higher end content, you're not gonna see much of a benefit with this perk, but in lower end, definitely more feasible that way. So it just kind of depends on where you're gonna take this SMG into. Although if you're pairing with Slice, you can still make it work. Swashbuckler is another perk here so that you get increasing damage bonuses after eliminations or a melee final blow up to a max of 33%. Now this one's probably a very good one to have. However, there's some other perks as well that can be beneficial to this. But again, if you're using a melee build, definitely rock Swashbuckler with this. Next, we have Binary Orbit, which is the opposite to Paracausal Affinity, meaning that whenever you get an elimination with the opposite elemental alignment, you get bonus damage. So in this case, being Strand, you need to get Arc, Solar, or Void final blows to get a damage buff on this SMG. Now, in theory, that seems pretty good, and it does work with abilities as well. However, in my experience, I didn't really see much benefit. Right now, the meta is very strand heavy this time around, so it's kind of hard to take advantage, especially with the artifact mods right now. So I would kind of stay away from binary orbit in this situation for PvE. But if you're using, a solar, void, or arc subclass, then with that, you'll be able to take advantage of this more effectively. So this kind of depends on which build you're planning to use with this SMG. Nextly, we have Surrounded, which is actually a tried and true damage perk, especially with the enhanced version giving a plus 47% damage increase to this SMG. Now, this one right here, I would definitely recommend for endgame content, especially with the nature of SMGs having to get up close and personal and having to be surrounded by targets. This is definitely your go-to perk for ultimate difficulty because I can tell you right now, those enemies are very, very tanky. This SMG at base takes a long time to kill one enemy. I think it takes a full clip. So having Surrounded would definitely help out in endgame content for ultimate difficulty stuff. So Surrounded will probably be the biggest one to pair for damage buff if you're going for that route specifically. Next, we have Harmony, which gives a plus 20% increase to damage and plus 15 handling after elimination with another weapon. Kind of okay, but with the other damage perks in this column, it's not really worth it in my opinion to go for. But if you want to use it, you can, but I wouldn't really recommend it. So for my ideal PvE god roll for a tier 5, if you're going to min-max it, ideally what I would go for in the left column would be Slice and Proximity Power. The other third perk here does not matter what you get. If you want to use something else there, maybe some hipfire fun with offhand strike, you could go that, or Transcendent Moment, you can go that as well. But ideally, the two biggest ones would be Enhanced Slice and Enhanced Proximity Power. Those would be the best ones to pair with this, so you can pair it up with melee builds, or Slice to debuff targets at a distance after popping your class ability, and pairing that with Vanguard's Determination would be very good for giving yourself damage resistance on top of that after eliminations. And lastly, in the fourth column, what I would go for specifically would be Hatchling, so that way I can use it for threading builds for maybe Warlock, Titan, or Hunter if I'm trying to do something with that. Nextly, I would go for Surrounded for the 47% increase to damage overall, just so that I have that max damage output in harder end content so I can actually make sure I get eliminations. And then after that, the last one's kind of up to your choice. You could go Dragonfly if you want to get more AoE ag clearing with this weapon, or maybe Swashbuckler if you're using a melee build and coinciding with, Proximity Power. Now it's kind of up in the air, but the two biggest ones in the right column would be Hatchling and Surrounded for me personally. And then for the barrels, I would recommend Small Bore for the increased range and stability bump with no negative downsides. For the mag, I would recommend Tactical Mag so that way you get the increase to your magazine size, the reload benefits, and stability as well. And for the Masterwork, I would recommend Reload Speed so that way it's just a little bit faster for reloading so you can get into the fight a little bit quicker. And for the mod, you can either go Backup Mag, Temporal Blast if you still want to take advantage of that while it's still active, or maybe Tactical to give yourself reload and handling benefits on top of that. Now onto PvP. This is where things are get a little tricky, but the way you build this SMG for PvP is going to be dependent on what fits you specifically. Now, going over the perks again. In the third column, we have Dynamic Sway, which is very good for this SMG because it fires very rapidly and is able to get to those max stacks of Dynamic Sway reduction very quickly just because of the nature of its archetype. Now, with this, it can make it fairly stable. Now, normally you would want this perk. However, with the stat package of this weapon coinciding with barrels, mag perks, masterwork, and mods, and tier 5, the stat package of this weapon shoots up exponentially. The stats for the one I was using in trials this past weekend, the range was 73, stability was 82, handling was 65, and reload speed was 59 after masterwork with a decent barrel, accurized rounds, ballistics, and a stability masterwork. So just keep in mind, even without dynamic sway, the stats of this weapon could be shot exponentially to where it doesn't even need dynamic sway reduction. And all of my engagements that I did for PvP, I did not use dynamic sway once, and I was still very, very consistent in my engagement. So depending on what you're going for, if you're going for full range at the cost of stability, then I would recommend dynamic sway. But if you're going for a balance of range and stability, if you want to stack up the stability even more so, definitely go dynamic sway reduction. Nextly, we have Encore, which gives you stacking stability, range, and accuracy bonuses for each final blow. Precision final blows give you more stacks than it would be with a body shot. Body shots give you 1 stack, and headshots give you 2 stacks. When max Encore stacks, you get plus 20 to your range and a plus 32 to your stability. Now, in 6s, you could definitely take advantage of Encore pretty effectively. However, in 3s, it's going to be a lot harder, especially with the nature of the meta right now, with hand cannon shotguns running very, very rampant right now. I definitely had some struggles using this SMG in those engagements, so Encore, being able to take advantage of that pretty effectively. In 3s, definitely not. In 6s, more likely so. But Encore, in this case, again, because of the stat package of this SMG and how high its stats can go, I wouldn't recommend it. Next, we have Transcendent Moment on a dark weapon, which in this case actually works very well for this SMG. If you don't know how Transcendent Moment works, final blows grant bonus stats based on the weapon's damage type alignment. Because this is a dark weapon, it gives you improved range and aim assistance with final blows. As far as the numbers of how much it gives you, it's not stated in the database just yet, so no one knows how much of it is. But for my testing with Transcendent Moment, it feels fairly sticky once you get Transcendent Moment proc. There's also Offhand Strike to improve weapon range, stability, and accuracy when firing from the hip. I'm not a hip fire person myself, so I would not recommend this perk, but if you use that with maybe, you know, radiant dance machines, you can definitely make that work. Then again, going back to Slice. Like I said before in the PvE section, going over Slice. Slice in PvP is substantial in the meta right now, especially with shotgun hand cannons. With that nerf to damage, it makes it a lot harder for shotgun hand cannon users to two-shot you, especially at range. So having Slice, especially in coordination with Vanguard's Determination for the DR resistance, in theory, it should still stack. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to test to make sure if it does or not. But from what gameplay I did do, I definitely noticed I survived a lot more with Slice debuffing the enemy and having Vanguard's Determination stacks built up on top of me too. So Slice, in my opinion, is the best perk for PvP in this column. Now let's get to the fourth column. Swashbuckler is definitely a good play, especially with SMGs being close range, and you're going to be close range with a lot of people. If you end up priming up your enemy to half health and getting the melee kill, having Swashbuckler to have the immediate 33% damage buff would be very nice to carry for a next engagement. Now again, with the meta being shotgun hand cannons, it's going to be very hard to take advantage of the perk with shotgun hand cannons running around pretty frequently right now in the meta. So just keep that in mind. Getting it off rip for the melee final blow and then carrying it over to a next engagement, it can have some viability, but just be worried that you might not have it all the time. Just know you're going to put yourself into a lot of danger if you're going specifically for the melee final blow first off and then carrying the swashbuckler to a next engagement. Just be wary of that. Then again, we have Binary Orbit, which in this case with this weapon, if you're using a double primary setup, can work pretty effectively. I was actually using that a lot, and having that TTK ship was pretty nice. In my experience, I didn't have much success with Binary Orbit when I was playing threes. By the time I went to an engagement, everyone was already dead, so I couldn't take advantage of the perk, or everyone ran and hid. So by the time I did enter an engagement, I didn't have the perk anymore. So Binary Orbit is definitely a unique situation with this, but I wouldn't really recommend it personally. Then we have Harmony, which is kind of a similar thing if you're using Binary Orbit with a double primary setup, except it's 20% increased damage instead of 25. So I wouldn't really recommend that in this case. And then lastly, I would recommend Hatchling, specifically right now with the artifact mod for Threadlings to spawn them off of strand damage. That coinciding with this, especially with specific strand builds become very apparent in the meta right now, that pairing with this and Hatchling is going to be very strong for close range engagements and just threading spam and keeping aggro on enemies if they're trying to hide behind walls or trying to recover behind something. That correlation with that is actually very nice. Now for my perfect tier 5 PvP god roll that I would be looking for, ideally in the left column, I'd be looking for Slice, hands down, for the decreasing of TTK values for the enemies after popping my class ability, especially coinciding with the origin trait. Then I would have Dynamic Sway Reduction if specifically I'm going for a high range stat at the cost of stability, having Dynamic Sway to offset that so that way I can still be consistent in my engagements, and then Transcendent Moment so that way final blows will give me improved range and aim assistance so that I can be more consistent in my engagements after the first initial final blow. Then in the last column, I would recommend Hatchling, like I stated before, if you're using it for a threading spam build, that would be the best perk to have on this SMG. Swashbuckler so I can have the increased damage after getting a melee final blow or after priming up the target with an SMG and carry that to the next engagement. Or Binary Orbit if I'm using a double primary setup and I'm using the opposite alignment energy weapon to get the damage buff, so that way I can get that off rip and carry that into another engagement. Then for the barrels, I recommend Small Bore for just to increase the stability and range, or you can also go Corkscrew as well if you want to bump up the handling just a little bit. For the mag perk, I recommend Accurized Rounds to push out the range of this SMG even further. For the Masterwork, I recommend Stability or Range, depending on what feels better to you. If you want more consistency, I would recommend Stability. If you want more range output, go for Range. Then for the mod, I recommend Ballistics so that we can further increase the range and stability. But you could also use Temporal Adapter for the increased stability, handling, and reload speed after just drawing out the weapon. Right now, it's very strong in PvP, but once this mod is gone, definitely go to Ballistics. That would definitely be the one I would recommend. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what you guys think. I gotta tell you all, this SMG feels very nice. I was not expecting to like it, but after getting my perfect tier 5 god roll this thing, it's a laser, man. I love this thing. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe if you did. Keep an eye on the next video where I'm going to be talking about the Trials Auto Rifle Ever Burning Glitz and why you need to hunt one, because it's going to be a main staple in the meta for a long time. It's kind of like aiding this hammer. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe if you did, and I'll catch you in the next one. And don't you ever forget, as always, keep it chill.